Welcome, everybody. By Friday afternoon, everybody in the plant wanted him gone. Nobody said it out loud in the meeting, but it was there. In the way people talked, in the way people looked at him, in the way supervisors reacted every time he stopped at a machine. Operators said he slowed everything down. Supervisors said he asked too many questions. In management, they were already talking about replacing him. The strange part, he had no idea, not a clue. When I got called into that plant, they told me it was a production issue. We just need more output. That's it. That's what they said. But the tone in the room told a different story. Because before we even walked out on the floor, they pointed to one name, an operator, and said, "That's our problem right there." So I didn't argue. I just said I want to walk the floor first. No meetings, no presentations, just the floor. Because the floor always tells the truth. When I stepped into that shop, it didn't look unusual at first. It looked like most small to mid-sized factories, machines running, forklifts moving, operators staying busy, at least on the surface. But I started watching something else. Not the machines, the pauses, the waiting, the small interruptions nobody tracks. That's where the real story always is. And then I saw him, the operator they all pointed at. Older guy, quiet, not trying to be noticed, just doing the job the same way every day. But something stood out immediately. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't panicking, um, and he wasn't ignoring things either. He was watching everything. I watched him run a cycle, normal pace, nothing unusual. Part comes out, he picks it up, checks it, then stops. Not a long stop, just enough to make everyone else uncomfortable. He reached over, his cycle stopped, took his glasses off, and leaned into the machine. Not looking at the screen, not looking at the paperwork, just listening. And that caught my attention. Because nobody else was listening. Everyone else was rushing. He was paying attention. He ran his hand along the coolant line. He looked at the part again. Then he adjusted something small, very small, and restarted the machine. No drama, no announcement, just back to work. Behind him, I could feel it. The supervisor watching him, not saying anything, but clearly frustrated. Like every stop was wasted time. Like every pause was a mistake. And that's when I realized something. Nobody was actually measuring what he was doing. They were only measuring how fast he was moving. Because on paper, he looked slower. But in reality, something didn't add up. His area had fewer scrap reports, fewer maintenance calls, and fewer customer complaints. But nobody was connecting those dots yet. At that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to ask what people thought about him. I was going to watch him long enough to understand him. Because in every factory I've ever been in, if someone is hated by everyone, but the numbers don't match the story, something is being missed. And I'll tell you right now, I was about to find out exactly what it was. So I stayed on the floor. I didn't say much. I just watched. Because once you've been around manufacturing long enough, you stop trusting what people tell you and start trusting what the process shows you. And everywhere I went, I kept hearing the same thing about him. He slows us down. He questions everything. He stops production too much. At first, I thought maybe they were right, because that's what the entire building believed. But when I started comparing stories to what I actually was seeing, and those things didn't line up. Every time he stopped a machine, it wasn't random, it wasn't hesitation, it wasn't reaction, or it was reaction. Like something triggered it, a sound, a vibration, a change in behavior, something most people wouldn't even notice. I watched one cycle closely. He loaded the machine, started it, watched it run, then halfway through the cycle, he stepped closer, not away, closer, like he was listening to it breathe. Then he stopped it again. Same pattern. No panic, no frustration, just correction. And that's when I noticed something else. Every time he stopped a machine, he didn't walk away. He fixed something small before restarting. A slight adjustment, a check, a quick cleanup, something simple, something everyone else would have ignored. Behind him, I saw another operator do the same job. That operator never stopped the machine, not once. He just kept running parts. Fast, constant, no interruptions. On paper, he looked like the better employee. But I noticed something else. His scrap bin was filling up, not dramatically, just slowly. Bad part here, rework there, inspection rejects stacking up quietly. Nothing big enough to trigger alarms, but enough to matter. And that's the thing about factories. The real problems rarely show up all at once. They leak out slowly until someone finally adds it all up. By mid-morning, I pulled maintenance logs and I asked a simple question. Which machines had the least emergency calls? The answer wasn't the fastest operators. It was him. Again, same name, different metric, same result. Then I asked for quality returns. Same story, lowest defects, same operator. At this point, I stopped thinking this was a coincidence. Because in manufacturing, coincidence usually means you haven't looked deep enough yet. So I started watching him even closer. And I finally saw it. He wasn't reacting to machines, he was preventing failures before they happened. He wasn't fixing breakdowns, he was stopping them from forming. And the more I watched, the more uncomfortable it became. Because it meant something nobody in that building wanted to admit yet. What if the problem wasn't him? What if the problem was how everyone else was working? And that thought changed everything I was seeing on the floor. Because suddenly, I wasn't watching one slow operator. I was watching the only person catching problems before they became expensive. And I needed proof. No opinions, no stories, numbers. So I asked for everything, downtime reports, scrap logs, maintenance calls, and I started lining it all up, machine by machine, operator by operator. And what I saw next is what changed the entire direction of this story. So now I stopped guessing, because guessing is where most factories go wrong. I asked for the numbers, all of them. Downtime reports, like I said before, and once I checked them side by side, machine by machine, operator by operator, it was all the same. And at first it looked messy. It, like most of the small factories, a lot of small issues, nothing that screamed emergency. But that's exactly how real problems hide. Not big spikes, in small patterns. So I started with scrap. One operator had the highest output. Everyone pointed at him as the good one. Fastest cycles, least stopping, most parts. Uh, on paper, he was the best. But his scrap rate told a different story. It wasn't catastrophic. It was consistent. And that's worse. Because consistent scrap means the process is quietly wrong every single day. Nobody notices because it never feels like a crisis. Then I pulled the operator they wanted to fire, the slow one. And his scrap numbers were nearly nothing, almost flat, like a straight line. I remember thinking, that can't be right. So I checked again. Same result. Then I moved the maintenance calls, breakdowns, emergency calls, emergency stops, machine resets, and again, same pattern. The fast operator's machine had more interruptions, more minor fixes, more unexplained stoppages. The slow operator almost had none. Now I'll tell you something about manufacturing. Downtime is expensive, but untracked micro stoppages are worse because they don't show up until the end of the week or at the end of the month when nobody remembers what caused them. Then I looked at the customer returns. That's what really got uncomfortable because returns, they don't care about opinions. They care about defects that escape the building. And guess who had the lowest numbers? Same operator again. At this point, the story in the building and the story in the data were completely different. So I asked myself a simple question. If he's slower, why is everything around him more stable? And if the faster operators are better, why are their machines costing more to run? That's when it hit me. Nobody was measuring performance. They were measuring motion. Because moving faster doesn't matter if you're moving forward or toward the wrong result. And the more I studied it, the clearer it became. He wasn't stopping production. He was stopping waste before it became expensive, before it became visible, before it became a report. And that's something most factories miss. They reward speed, but they pay for instability. So now I had enough. Enough data, enough patterns, enough contradiction. It was time to take it back to management. Because at some point, you don't argue with the floor anymore. You show the numbers. And I'll tell you right now, they were not ready for what I was about to put on the table. By the time I walked into that conference room, the mood had already changed. Nobody was joking. Nobody was talking about production numbers anymore. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that usually means people already know something's coming. They just didn't know what yet. Management was sitting there waiting. Plant manager, production supervisor, quality, maintenance, all of them expecting the same thing: confirmation. They thought I was going to validate what they already believed, that the operator was the problem. So I didn't start with opinions. I started with paper. I laid the first report down: scrap rates, then downtime, then maintenance calls, then customer returns. One by one, no drama, just data. And I said something simple. Before anyone says another word, just look at the pattern. Nobody spoke. They just stared, flipping pages, slowly, quietly. Then I asked a question that changed the room. Which one of you wants to explain why your slowest operator has the lowest scrap, lowest downtime, and the lowest customer complaints in the entire building? Silence. Not confusion, not debate. Silence. Someone finally said it, almost under their breath. That doesn't make sense. And I nodded, because that's exactly the problem. It didn't make sense until you stopped measuring speed and started measuring outcomes. That's when the plant manager leaned forward and said the question everyone was thinking. So what are we supposed to do now? I didn't answer right away because I already knew the answer wasn't in a spreadsheet. It was in the man that we were about to fire. So I said, bring him in. And I'll never forget that moment, because when he walked into that room, he didn't know what was happening. He thought he was in trouble. You could see it in his face. He was already preparing to defend himself. Nobody spoke for a second. Then I asked him one question right there in front of everyone. Why do you keep stopping your machine? He looked around the room, then back at me, and said it like it was the simplest thing in the world. I'd rather lose a minute now than lose a shift later. And nobody laughed. Nobody argued. Nobody even tried to interrupt him. Because in that moment, every single person in that room understood something they had missed for a long time. He wasn't slowing production. He was protecting it. And after a few seconds of silence, the plant manager leaned back and said, we've been looking at the wrong guy. That meeting didn't end up with a decision to fire him. It ended up with something very different. A decision to learn from him, train others like him, and start measuring what actually matters. Because in manufacturing, you don't win by looking the busiest. You win by making the least amount of waste. And before we left the room, I looked back at him one more time, and I asked him something. If he could sum up everything he does in one sentence, what would it be? He didn't hesitate. He just smiled a little and said it again, slow, calm, and certain. I'd rather lose a minute than lose a shift. And that's the truth that stuck with everyone in that room. Not because it sounded good, not because it was proven in the numbers on the floor and in the results nobody had been paying attention to. If there's one lesson from this story, it's this. In your shop, the person everyone complains about might be the one preventing your biggest losses. So before you write someone off, ask a better question. Now, how fast are they working? But what problems are they catching that everyone else is missing? Because in my experience, the best operators don't always look productive, but they always look right in hindsight. If you remember nothing else from this story, remember this line. Because I'll tell you, a lot more about manufacturing than most dashboards will ever tell you. I'd rather lose a minute than lose a shift. That's pretty deep right there. So, like, follow, and share. Hit that notification bell so you know when my next content comes out. I hope everyone watches all the way to the end. And until next time, I'll see you then.